In a world where the moral GPS seems constantly out of signal, where do you seek guidance when life's storms intensify? The uncomfortable truth few admit is that most people navigate aimlessly, adrift in an ocean of others' opinions and passing fads. While many boast of following their own star, how many truly possess an internal compass calibrated to consistently point toward the north of human excellence? This is precisely the silent crisis of our era: abundance of information, scarcity of wisdom. What Aristotle understood more than 2 millennia ago, and what our hyper connected society seems to have forgotten, is that true freedom doesn't consist in doing what you want, but in wanting to do what you should. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit, teaches the philosopher, offering a revolutionary perspective that challenges both the moral relativism and rigid dogmatism of our times. Imagine possessing such refined inner clarity that, even under extreme pressure, your decisions would flow naturally in harmony with your deepest values, not through blind obedience to external rules, but through practical wisdom cultivated through deliberate and consistent choices. The promise of Aristotelian ethics is not a set of commandments to be obeyed, but a path of personal transformation that integrates reason and emotion, theory and practice, individuality and community. Unlike philosophies that demand the suppression of desires or the rejection of material reality, Aristotle offers a balanced vision where passions are not enemies of virtue, but energies to be harmonized by reason. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how this ancient map of human excellence can guide your decisions in the 21st century, providing not just abstract principles, but practical strategies for developing incorruptible character. Prepare to unravel the secret that the truly wise know. Virtue is not just the path to a good life, it is the good life itself in action. What is virtue? Virtue, in the Aristotelian conception, is not merely an abstract concept, but a practical disposition that guides human beings toward excellence. Virtue, then, is a state of character concerned with choice, lying in a mean, the mean relative to us, this being determined by a rational principle, and by that principle by which the man of practical wisdom would determine it, teaches Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics. This definition reveals something profound. Virtue is not a passive state, but an active capacity to make correct choices in the face of life's circumstances, like a navigator who constantly adjusts the helm to maintain course in turbulent seas. When we observe carefully, we notice that virtue manifests as a second nature in the individual, something that becomes an intrinsic part of their being through constant practice. We become just by performing just acts, temperate by performing temperate acts, brave by performing brave acts. States the philosopher, it's like learning to play the piano. Knowing the notes and music theory isn't enough. One must practice daily until the fingers move naturally across the keys without conscious effort. Similarly, the virtuous person doesn't need to deliberate at length about how to act in each situation. They simply act according to virtue because it has already been incorporated into their character. Aristotelian virtue is also distinguished by being a form of practical knowledge, different from theoretical knowledge. Practical wisdom is neither scientific knowledge nor art. It is not science, because that which relates to action can be different from what it is, and it is not art, because acting and producing are different kinds of things, explains Aristotle. Think of the experienced doctor who, upon examining a patient, intuitively perceives the correct diagnosis even before performing all the tests. This is the type of knowledge that characterizes virtue. It's not a set of memorized rules, but a capacity for discernment that allows one to recognize what is appropriate in each specific context, like a lighthouse that illuminates the path even on the darkest nights. The dance of extremes. Virtue as universal harmony. The universality of virtue, as Aristotle conceives it, resides in its nature as a mean, or middle way between extremes. Virtue is a kind of mean, since its target is the intermediate, explains the philosopher, thus establishing the famous triadic relationship, excess, deficiency, and the virtuous middle point. This structure is not arbitrary, but grounded in human nature itself, an objective reality. Consider courage, which sits between reckless boldness and paralyzing cowardice. In any culture or era, these extremes are recognizable, even though their specific manifestations may vary according to context. The harmonious middle that characterizes virtue is not a mathematical average, but a mean relative to us, as Aristotle emphasizes. By the mean of the thing, I understand that which is equidistant from both extremes. By the mean relative to us, I understand that which is neither too much nor too little, and this is not one and the same for all. It's like a conductor who adjusts the volume of each instrument, not so that all sound equally, but so that each contributes harmoniously to the whole work. Similarly, virtue requires sensitivity to particular circumstances, recognizing that the point of balance varies according to the person, situation, and moment, but is always guided by a universal principle of harmony. The search for the harmonious middle transcends cultures and epochs because it responds to a fundamental need of the human condition, the need for moral orientation in a world of conflicting possibilities. In everything that is continuous and divisible, it is possible to take more, less, or an equal amount, and that either in terms of the thing itself or relative to us, observes Aristotle. This triadic structure appears in various philosophical traditions around the world, from the Buddhist middle way to the Confucian doctrine of the mean, suggesting that the Aristotelian intuition captured something profoundly true about human nature. Like a law of moral physics, virtue as the means seems to be a discovery, not an invention, revealing a universal pattern that transcends cultural particularities. Why? Virtue defines true nobility, and vice defines baseness. True nobility, in the Aristotelian perspective, does not derive from hereditary titles or accumulated wealth, but is founded exclusively on excellence of character. Nobility shines through even in misfortunes, states Aristotle, suggesting that the truly virtuous person maintains dignity even in the most adverse circumstances. Observe how, throughout history, we revere figures like Socrates, who preferred to drink hemlock rather than compromise his principles, or Marcus Aurelius, who even as emperor of Rome lived according to rigorous Stoic principles, seeking virtue above power. These individuals embody authentic nobility that transcends social positions and reveals itself in the capacity to act virtuously even when it would be easier to yield to vice. On the other hand, vice represents true baseness because it degrades what is most precious in human beings, their capacity for rational self-determination. Vices are voluntary, for it is in our power to avoid them, teaches the philosopher in the Nicomachean Ethics. When someone habitually surrenders to cowardice, injustice, or intemperance, they are not merely committing isolated acts of weakness, but gradually sculpting a deficient character that becomes increasingly difficult to reform. It's like a musician who, practicing incorrectly, not only performs a specific piece poorly, but develops bad habits that compromise their entire artistic ability. The vicious person, therefore, is not just someone who occasionally acts badly, but someone who has become incapable of discerning and choosing the good. The distinction between nobility and baseness based on virtue offers a criterion of moral evaluation that transcends appearances and social conventions. It is not the man who possesses or uses virtue, but he who acts according to it who should be considered virtuous, clarifies Aristotle. This perspective invites us to reconsider our judgments about success and failure in contemporary life. An entrepreneur who builds an empire through innovation and integrity demonstrates both material and moral excellence, while someone who achieves positions of power through cheating and manipulation, even if publicly admired, lacks authentic Aristotelian nobility. Virtue, therefore, establishes a moral aristocracy that does not depend on external privileges, but on the intrinsic quality of the choices and actions that define each person's character. The garden of excellences, flourishing virtues and the thorns of vices. In Aristotle's moral architecture, each virtue occupies a precise space between two opposing vices, forming a detailed map of human excellence. Courage is the mean with respect to fear and rashness, explains the philosopher, illustrating how virtue represents the ideal balance between extremes. The courageous person is not one who fears nothing, which would be reckless temerity, nor one who fears everything, which would characterize cowardice. Rather, it is one who fears what should be feared to the appropriate degree for the right reasons and at the opportune moment. Think of an experienced firefighter who, recognizing the real danger of a fire, still enters the building to save lives. They feel fear, but neither allow it to paralyze them nor lead them to unnecessary risks. Generosity, another cardinal virtue, lies between prodigality and avarice. The generous person will give for a noble purpose and in the right way, for they will give to the right people the right amount and on the right occasion. Temperance, in turn, represents the mean in relation to pleasures, especially physical ones. It's not about denying pleasure, as an extreme ascetic would do, nor surrendering unrestrainedly to it, like a hedonist, but enjoying it in the appropriate measure, like someone who appreciates a good wine without falling into drunkenness. Justice occupies a special place in the Aristotelian system, being considered complete virtue. In justice, all virtues are comprehended, states the philosopher, highlighting its comprehensive character. Distributive justice, for example, consists of giving each person what is due according to their merit, neither unduly privileging some favoritism, nor ignoring relevant differences in contribution, blind egalitarianism. A teacher who evaluates students with clear criteria, recognizing both effort and results, exemplifies this virtue. Magnanimity or greatness of soul manifests in one who, conscious of their own worth, seeks great honors because they truly deserve them, without falling into presumptuous vanity or false humility that denies real talents. Figures like Benjamin Franklin or Winston Churchill, who combined self-confidence with genuine service to society, illustrate this rarely understood virtue in our time. The chisel of practice, How virtue is sculpted in actions, not in books. One of Aristotle's most profound insights about virtue is that it cannot be acquired merely through theoretical study, but demands constant and deliberate practice. We are studying not to know what virtue is, but to become good, since otherwise there would be no advantage in studying it. The philosopher categorically states in the Nicomachean Ethics. This observation reveals a fundamental truth about moral excellence. Intellectually knowing what is just, courageous, or temperate is not sufficient to act in accordance with these virtues. It's like knowing all the rules of chess without ever having played a game. Theoretical knowledge, though necessary, remains sterile without the practical experience that transforms it into lived wisdom. Virtue, therefore, resembles a craft skill more than abstract knowledge. We become builders by building and lyre players by playing the lyre. Similarly, we become just by performing just acts, temperate by performing temperate acts, and courageous by performing courageous acts, teaches Aristotle. This analogy with practical arts is revealing. Just as a carpenter perfects their technique through years of working with wood, developing an intuition that transcends mechanical rules, the virtuous person cultivates a moral discernment that allows them to respond appropriately to the complexities of ethical life. It is no coincidence that many philosophical traditions, from Stoicism to Buddhism, prescribe daily spiritual exercises, such as meditation on virtues or examination of conscience, recognizing that moral character is forged in the disciplined repetition of virtuous actions. This emphasis on practice has revolutionary implications for contemporary moral education. Legislators make citizens good by forming habits in them, observes Aristotle, suggesting that the social environment and institutions play a crucial role in the development of virtue. Parents who wish to cultivate honesty in their children must not only explain the concept, but create situations where the child can practice truthfulness and experience the intrinsic satisfaction of acting virtuously. Schools that seek to form ethical citizens need to go beyond theoretical lessons about values, offering concrete opportunities for the exercise of responsibility, cooperation, and justice. Like a musician who practices scales daily until technique becomes second nature, the aspirant to virtue must engage in virtuous actions repeatedly until goodness becomes their natural way of being in the world. The Symphony of the Polis: How Virtue Orchestrates the True Art of Governing. Aristotle's conception of politics radically transcends contemporary understanding, often reduced to partisan disputes and power maneuvers. Politics is the master science, declares Aristotle, for it determines which sciences should be studied in a state, which each citizen should learn, and to what extent. This elevated vision understands politics as the art of ordering the community for the common good, having as its ultimate purpose not merely collective survival, but the good and virtuous life for all citizens. It is like a conductor who not only keeps the musicians playing together, but leads them to perform the most sublime harmony possible. True politics seeks not just social order, but collective human excellence. Virtue constitutes the indispensable foundation of this authentic politics, because, as Aristotle teaches, man is by nature a political animal, whose full realization can only occur in community. The city-state is a community of equals, aiming at the best life possible, states the philosopher, indicating that the purpose of political association is to create conditions for integral human flourishing. A genuinely Aristotelian politician will not merely ask, "How can I win the next election?" or "How can I increase GDP?" but "How can I help create a society where citizens can fully develop their virtues?" We see glimpses of this approach in leaders like George Washington, who refused the possibility of becoming king, or Edmund Burke, who defended traditional institutions as guardians of accumulated wisdom. The interdependence between individual virtue and healthy politics creates a virtuous circle. Good laws and institutions facilitate the development of virtuous citizens, who in turn sustain and perfect these same institutions. Legislators make citizens good by forming habits in them, and this is the purpose of every legislator. Those who do not do it well err, and it is in this that a good constitution differs from a bad one, observes Aristotle. This perspective offers a profound criterion for evaluating political systems, not just by their economic efficiency or stability, but by their capacity to cultivate human excellence. A society that produces prosperous but morally atrophied citizens, or technologically advanced but incapable of self-control and practical wisdom, fails in its most fundamental purpose, according to the Aristotelian vision. True politics, therefore, can never be separated from ethics. They are two sides of the same coin, united by the ideal of virtue as the realization of human nature. Conclusion: your practical path to virtue. Aristotle's approach to virtue offers a practical roadmap anyone can follow. Begin by selecting one virtue to develop, perhaps courage, temperance, or generosity, and observe its expression in people you admire. Then create deliberate opportunities to practice this virtue in small ways, just as a musician masters simple passages before tackling complex compositions. Honest self-assessment is crucial. We must drag ourselves away from the extreme that is more contrary to the mean, advises Aristotle. Identify your natural tendencies and practice their counterbalance. If you tend toward impulsive spending, establish a strict budget and wait before making non-essential purchases. If you lean toward miserliness, set concrete generosity goals and stick to them. Remember that virtue isn't a destination, but a continuous practice. As Aristotle reminds us, one swallow does not make a summer. Isolated good actions don't constitute a virtuous character. It's through daily consistency and attention to finding the appropriate middle path that we gradually develop an internal compass capable of guiding us through life's storms. If you enjoyed this exploration of timeless wisdom, subscribe and give it a like. Until next time.